Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m. and just known something was wrong? Not felt it, known it. The way you know the stove's on before you even smell smoke. I used to roll my eyes at people who said things like that. I don't anymore. My grandmother passed in October of 2019. She'd lived alone in her house in rural Ohio for 32 years since my grandfather died, and when she went, nobody was prepared to deal with the property. My mom was in the middle of a divorce. My uncle lived in Portland and wasn't flying back for anything short of a funeral. So it fell to me, 26 years old, unemployed between jobs, and the only grandchild who'd actually visited her more than twice a decade. The house was mine to sort out. I want to be clear about who my grandmother was. She was not a scary woman. She made apricot jam and watched Wheel of Fortune every night and kept a ceramic rooster on the kitchen counter that I'd been afraid of as a kid. She was ordinary in the way that only truly good people are ordinary. I loved her, and being in her house without her in it was the loneliest I've ever felt in my life. I drove up on a Friday in November, planned to stay the weekend, catalog what was worth keeping, start throwing things out. The house was a 2-story colonial with a finished basement. She'd used the basement as a sewing room mostly. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a bathroom with pink tile that hadn't been updated since 1987. I'd slept in the middle guest room every time I'd visited as a kid. That's where I put my bag. The first night was uneventful. I ate a sad gas station sandwich, found an old box of Constant Comment tea in the cupboard, and sat in her living room watching her television, which still had physical channel buttons. I went to bed around 11. I was asleep within minutes. Grief is exhausting in a way nothing else is. The sound woke me up at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately. It was a dragging sound, long and slow, like furniture being moved across a hardwood floor. It was coming from below me, the basement. I lay still for a full minute, listening. It stopped. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that. The wood contracts in cold weather. Beams shift. I told myself my grandmother's furnace was probably ancient and made noise. I put my pillow over my head and went back to sleep. The second night, it happened again. Same time, near enough. 2:51 a.m., same sound, that long, low drag, but this time it was followed by something else. A pause, and then what I can only describe as something being set down, a soft, heavy thud, like a piece of furniture lowered carefully onto a floor. I sat up in bed. I turned on the lamp. I sat there for 15 minutes listening, nothing else. I rationalized it thoroughly. Maybe an animal had gotten in, a raccoon or a possum, something large enough to knock things over in the sewing room. The basement had a small window that might not be sealed properly. I made a mental note to check it in the morning. In the morning, I went down to the basement. Everything looked exactly as it had when I'd arrived. Sewing table in the corner, dress form against the wall, boxes of fabric, the ceramic sewing basket she'd had since before my mother was born. I checked the window. It was latched. There was no sign of an animal, no droppings, no disturbed fabric, nothing. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed it. The third night, my last night in the house, I didn't go to sleep easily. I lay there in the dark with the lamp still on, reading on my phone, not willing to admit to myself what I was actually doing, which was waiting. It started at 2:44 a.m., the dragging, slower this time, and longer. It crossed what I estimated was the entire length of the basement on maybe 30 feet and then stopped directly below my bed. I know that because I could feel the faintest vibration in the floor through the bed frame. Then the thud, then silence. Then footsteps on the basement stairs. I was up before I'd made a conscious decision to move. I grabbed my keys and my phone and I was out the front door and in my car and at the end of the driveway before I stopped shaking long enough to call 911. The dispatcher was patient. 2 officers came. They cleared the house. They found nothing in the basement that had been moved. No sign of entry. No one hiding anywhere. One of the officers, older guy, had probably seen everything, asked me if I'd been staying there alone. I said yes. He nodded slowly and said, "Old houses make a lot of noise." He said it in a way that suggested he didn't entirely believe that either. I hired an estate company to finish the catalog. I did not go back. My mom asked me once, a few months later, if I thought it was Grandma. I didn't know how to answer that. I still don't. My grandmother was not a frightening person. Whatever was in that basement at 2:44 in the morning, moving something slowly across the floor and then climbing the stairs. I don't know if it was her. I don't know if I want it to have been. Because the sound wasn't gentle. It wasn't the sound of someone who missed you. People always ask what the scariest sound is. Thunder, they usually guess. Or a scream. Or silence when there shouldn't be silence. I'd have agreed with that last one, right up until the summer I sublet my friend's apartment and realized silence wasn't the problem. The problem was what was underneath it. I was 29, freshly out of a 4-year relationship, and too proud to move back in with my parents in Connecticut. My college friend Dara was doing a 3-month research fellowship in Edinburgh and needed someone to cover her rent in her Pilsen apartment. Chicago, 2-bedroom, street level, the kind of place with exposed brick and a radiator that sounded like a mariachi band in February. I moved in with a duffel bag and a box of cookware and the absolute certainty that I was fine. I was not fine. But that's a different story. The apartment was comfortable in the way that someone else's space is always slightly comfortable and slightly wrong. Everything was Dara's. Her mismatched mugs, her succulent shelf, her collection of vintage paperbacks arranged by color. I slept in the smaller bedroom that she used as a guest room. She had a cat, Mortimer, who she'd left in my care, a large gray tabby with strong opinions about everything, including, it turned out, the hallway. June was hot and uneventful. I got a temp job doing data entry. I ordered too much Thai food. I took long walks by the river. The apartment was ground floor, which meant noise from the street and a near constant awareness of feet passing the window. But I adapted. What I didn't adapt to, what I couldn't entirely explain, was Mortimer's behavior. He wouldn't go in the hallway after dark. I noticed it at the end of my second week. He'd always been a roamer, padding back and forth between rooms all night, but now he'd stop at the hallway entrance around 9 or 10 p.m., stare down it, and back away. Every night. Like there was a wall there he couldn't see, but could feel. I thought maybe there was a draft from the front door. I checked. There wasn't. I told myself the cat was strange. The cat was, objectively, strange. This felt sufficient. It stopped feeling sufficient on a Tuesday night in late July. I was in bed, reading, around midnight. The apartment was quiet. Mortimer was curled at my feet. And then I heard it, counting, low, almost sub-audible, coming from the hallway. A voice. And I use that word carefully because it wasn't quite a voice. It was more like the shape of a voice, the cadence of one, counting slowly. 1, 2, 3. The pauses between numbers were too long, like whatever was counting had to think about each number before it said it. I didn't move. I am not someone who freezes. I've pulled over for accidents. I've broken up a fight once. I'm not a person who freezes. I froze. I lay there for what felt like 5 minutes, and the counting continued, and Mortimer sat up and stared at the doorway with his ears flat against his head, and did not make a single sound. It stopped at 11. I got up. I turned every light on. I checked every room, every closet, under both beds, behind the shower curtain. I found nothing. I left all the lights on and didn't sleep. In the morning I felt idiotic. Old buildings carry sound strangely. Everyone knows this. There was probably a neighbor, someone who talked in their sleep, someone with a television on too loud, and it traveled through the walls in a weird way. Ground floor apartments are notoriously porous for sound. This was fine. I was fine. 3 nights later, it happened again. Same time around midnight, same cadence. But this time I was sitting upright in bed already because some part of me had been waiting, and this time I counted back. Mentally, silently, I kept track. It counted to 11 and stopped. I know it was 11 because I checked. I'd been counting along on my fingers. I texted Dara at 12:06 a.m. I tried to be casual about it. I said something like, random question, have you ever heard weird sounds in the hallway at night? She was 6 hours ahead, but she was awake. She keeps strange hours. She replied within minutes. She said, please don't freak out, but yes, I never figured out what it was. I just stopped going into the hallway after midnight. The cat won't either, as you've probably noticed. I asked her how long it had been happening. She said, the whole time I've lived here. 2 years. I want to tell you I handled that well. I asked my upstairs neighbor the next day, older man, retired, home all day, if he'd ever noticed unusual sounds at night. He looked at me for a long moment and said very carefully that the apartment below Dara's had been empty for the last 8 months. Before that, a young woman had lived there alone. She'd moved out abruptly. He didn't know why. I slept at a friend's place for the last 3 weeks of the sublet. Dara came back in September. I helped her unload her luggage and we had a drink, and I asked her straight out if she was really okay living there. She thought about it for a while. Then she said the thing that stayed with me. She said, I'm fine as long as I don't think about what it's counting to. I moved back to Connecticut 2 months later. My pride could take it. Some nights back home in my childhood bedroom, I still hear numbers in that particular rhythm. 1, 2, pause, 3. I know it's just the house settling. I know it's just blood in my ears. I just never count along anymore. Story 3. The Other Side of the Wall. I will tell you up front that I have a completely rational explanation for most of what happened. I'm an engineer. I troubleshoot for a living, and I spent 6 months trying very hard to apply that skill to the sounds coming from inside my wall, and I came up with nothing that fully held together. My wife and I bought our first house in 2021, Portland, Oregon, 1940s craftsman, the kind of place that looks charming in photos and reveals its personality slowly, like a difficult person at a dinner party. We knew going in it was a project. We knew the electrical was partially updated and the insulation was questionable, and one of the bathrooms still had the original tile. We didn't know about the wall in the office. Our second bedroom had become my home office. I work remotely, have for years. It was a small room, maybe 11 by 12, with a closet on the north wall and a window facing the side yard. I set up my desk facing the window. The north wall, the closet wall, was directly behind my chair. The sounds started in March, just over 2 months after we moved in. The first time I noticed it, I was on a work call, headphones on, and during a pause in the conversation, I became aware of a noise I'd been filtering out. Scratching. Rhythmic, slow scratching coming from the wall behind me. Close. Not from inside the closet. From within the wall itself. I assumed immediately it was mice. We'd found evidence of mice in the basement when we first moved in. Set traps. Dealt with it. This seemed continuous. I told my wife. We called a pest company. They came out, checked the wall cavity through the closet. Found nothing. No droppings, no gnaw marks, no nesting material. The tech said the wall construction would actually make it difficult for rodents to access. It was insulated with what looked like original era fill. He suggested settling, or possibly a branch against the exterior siding. I went outside and looked. There was no branch. The scratching continued, and I adapted to it the way you adapt to most things. I stopped fully noticing it. By April, it was background noise, but in May, it changed. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8 p.m. My wife was on the couch in the living room. I was in the office catching up on email. The scratching was there as usual, and then it wasn't scratching anymore. It was knocking. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced, from inside the wall. I took my headphones off and sat very still. 3 more. The same even rhythm. Like someone knocking on a door. I knocked back. 3 times, flat-palmed on the drywall. There was a pause. Then 3 more knocks from the other side. I went completely cold. And I also, immediately, had an explanation. Pipes. Old houses have old pipes, and pipes knock, and it was entirely possible there was a plumbing run inside that wall that I hadn't noticed on the home inspection. I measured the wall. I looked at the house plans we'd gotten at closing. There was no plumbing in that wall, but the plans were from 1987, a previous renovation. There could have been changes. I told my wife. She listened with the face she makes when she's deciding how worried to be. She suggested we get someone to look at the pipes. The plumber found no plumbing in the north wall of the office. What he did find, and he mentioned it almost offhandedly, like it wasn't remarkable, was that the original closet had been smaller. Someone at some point had framed out the existing closet, moving the north wall roughly 18 inches. The original wall was still there, behind the new drywall. There was a gap, a cavity, about 18 inches deep, running the full length of the room, sealed on both sides. He said it was unusual but not unheard of. Probably a previous owner had done a DIY renovation, gotten the framing wrong, decided to just cover it rather than redo it. He said there could be literally anything in there. Old insulation, forgotten belongings, whatever they'd wanted to hide in the wall. He said it with a laugh. I didn't laugh. The knocking stopped after that. For almost 3 weeks, nothing. And then, one morning in early June, I sat down at my desk and there was a smell, faint organic wrong. It lasted 1 day and was gone. I opened every window. I told myself it was a dead animal. Something had gotten in through the exterior, died in the cavity. It would decompose and the smell would go, and that would be the end of it. The smell didn't come back. But the week after, I was working late alone. My wife was visiting her sister in Seattle, and the knocking started again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, and I sat in my chair for a long time, and I thought about the gap in the wall and the original drywall behind the new drywall, and the 18-inch cavity that had been sealed up at some point by someone who, for whatever reason, had decided it was easier to build around it than to open it. I thought about knocking back. I didn't. We sold the house 14 months later. The market was good and we got our asking price, and neither of us said aloud that the house was the reason we were selling. My wife had started working from the living room. I had started working from coffee shops. We told each other it was better for us to be around people. I think about that cavity sometimes, about the 18 months we owned that house and what we never opened up. The home inspector report is still somewhere in my email. I've never reread it. There's probably nothing in the wall. There was probably a pipe that the plumber missed, or an animal that left, or a neighbor I never met with rhythmic habits and thin construction between us. There's probably nothing in the wall. I just think about the fact that when I knocked 3 times, something knocked back. And it knocked back immediately, like it had been waiting a long time.